All right, good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are so glad to be here with all of you tonight to welcome our friends from Sisterlove Reproductive Justice for an advocacy training. Sisterlove was founded July of 1989. It is committed to sexual and reproductive justice and its many intersections. It remains committed to fighting to eradicate society's challenges and inequities, particularly where women, transgender people, and gender non-conforming people lack access. Sisterlove's PAP team leads grassroots advocacy campaigns, builds issue-based coalitions, leads policy initiatives, and develops projects in the areas of reproductive justice and its intersections as it relates to marginalized communities and women of color. We have two advocates with us tonight who are going to lead us through a training. I'm going to ask them to grab the mics that are in their chairs and introduce themselves. They should be on, but I'm going to turn them on up here. But everyone put your hands together first, and we'll get into it. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Amanda Hamdiarman. I just actually graduated with my master's in African and Women's Studies from Atlanta University. Yes, I'm excited about that. I've been with Sisterlove for actually a year now that it's May. I am our policy advocacy and mobilization organizer. So we do a lot of work at the Capitol. I do a lot of our mobilization work. She's more of our policy person, but I'm happy to introduce herself. I'm super happy to be here. I hope everyone enjoys and learns something tonight, and I'll get together.
Hi everyone, I am Gabby Hernandez. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. And I am the If, When, How Lawyering for Reproductive Justice legal fellow at Sisterlove. Lawyering for Reproductive Justice and If, When, How brings baby attorneys, is what I like to call them, to the field of reproductive justice to essentially move policies at the Capitol, to draft legislation, and to discuss with legislators as well. I recently graduated from Emory Law in May, and then I started with Sisterlove as my first job outside of law school. And it's been really great. Thank you so much for being here, for dedicating your time. I know that we are tired, so I'm sure you are too. So I guess we can go ahead and begin.
So a little bit about Sisterlove. It was founded by Dazon Dixon Diallo. So this year is Sisterlove's 35th anniversary, so we've been around for a very long time. We're located on Ralph David Abernathy in the West End. We are known for doing free HIV STI testing. You can walk in, get a free test. That is our Healthy Love Experience program. They do all of our testing on our mobile clinic and in office. We also have the community-based research program, and that is research centering Black women, and it's led by Black women. We recently produced papers called the Gamma Papers, and it talks about abortion and how it affects Black women. And then we have our policy advocacy and mobilization department, and that's us. We can skip this one too.
I think we talked about that already.
So it's always good just to get a feel of what everyone knows so far before we even begin. But does anyone in the crowd, have you ever heard of reproductive justice? Do you know this term? Is it familiar with you? I see some head nods. Okay. And do we know about advocacy? Have you heard this term? Do we know what it is? Okay. We can go to the next one. So essentially, reproductive justice, there are at least 3 tenets of the framework. It's the right to not have a child, the right to have a child, and to parent the children that you already have in healthy and safe environments. So what we've seen a lot with the movement so far is that it's been co-opted, and most people, when they think of reproductive justice, they only think of abortion, but it's so much deeper than abortion. Abortion is one aspect. It's a very popular topic. It's a hot button issue, so it's really easy to correlate reproductive justice and abortion, but it's much deeper than that, which we'll learn about today. The reproductive justice framework is intersectional, so that means it analyzes the way different oppressive identities interact and how it shapes the way you live your life. So just for myself as an example, I'm Black. That's one intersecting identity. I'm a woman. That's another one. Um, I'm disabled. I have some intellectual disabilities. That's another one. So three. Um, Everyone's different. Everyone has different identities, but they all play a role in the way that you move in society and how society interacts with you. This framework was named by Kimberly Crenshaw, so it was started by a Black woman, named by a Black woman, and obviously developed by Black women and other people, but essentially it was started by Kimberly, not started, but named by Kimberly Crenshaw. Um, and it's just a framework. So what a framework is, it's a way to analyze a problem. It's a way to analyze the world. It doesn't mean it's the only solution. It's just one way to frame an issue. So essentially, reproductive justice issues, I like to tell people if it affects your life, your health, or your family, it's going to be a reproductive justice issue. So environmental justice issues touch the RJ framework, economic issues, housing issues, elder justice is very important. But anything that touches you, your family, your community, the planet is a reproductive justice issue because it affects the way you live your life and everyone else as well. So bodily autonomy is very central to reproductive justice. Bodily autonomy is tied to what's happening in your community. So issues, oppressions that affect another person's in the community eventually will trickle down and affect the way that you can make decisions. The protection and violation of human rights affects self-determination. Self-determination is central to the reproductive justice framework. We want to be able to determine our lives based on our own experiences, and we want to be the center people, the center position in power who are making these decisions. Also, collaboration among social justice movements is absolutely necessary and key for the reproductive justice framework to work because we know it touches different movements like the environmental justice movement, elder justice, housing justice, food system justice, and blah, 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 blah. So it's a really, really useful framework to build coalitions. And then, like I said, this is just an easy reminder if you're trying to think of a way to frame an issue as a reproductive justice issue. If it affects your community, your safety, your health, or your life, it absolutely is a reproductive justice issue. Reproductive justice issues are not only tied to our organs, our anatomy, it's tied to what's happening in our communities. So I have two examples here just so we can kind of have a lens and practice using the framework. One, we have Cop City. This is a huge issue in Atlanta. Obviously, not just Atlanta. They're building these locations all over the country. But at its face, Cop City seems like an issue that might just be about criminalization or criminal justice, but it's definitely a reproductive justice issue. For one, it affects the environment. It's going to cut down millions, hundreds of thousands of trees, and that's the essential way that the city keeps itself cool. So especially with rising climate change, we know that Cop City is also an environmental issue. We know that it affects our indigenous communities. This center is being built on land that was indigenous land, then turned into a jail. So we just keep seeing the cycle of reusing this land for victimization and oppression. Cop City, obviously, on its face, is a criminal justice issue, and it affects livelihoods and families because millions of dollars are being funneled into police violence, victimization, criminalization, when that can be used to be funding education, housing, other issues that families, women, men, everyone care about. Our second example is fossil fuels. I'll kind of read through this one and then just give everyone a second to kind of see how this could be a reproductive justice issue. And then if you want to share, we can. If you don't, we can. But currently, public and private entities finance the use of fossil fuels. In 2022, $13 million in many government subsidies went toward the fossil fuel industry. Fossil fuels include oil, gas, and coal energies. Fossil fuels are extremely damaging toward the environment and have contributed to climate change. So I'll give you guys a second to think about it. If in any way you can see how this can be a reproductive justice issue, you can let me know. You can share it slow too. with health, obviously, with defining just moderate people on her. And then sellers, it's really based opposite also. And then pollution in terms of health again. Yes, definitely. All of those show the way that our identities intersect. We see health, environmental issues connecting. Also, another important one with fossil fuels is it affects a lot of people's the way cultural information is passed down, because it's a lot of, especially indigenous communities, their knowledge is tied to the land. So the destruction of the land not only is an environmental issue, but actually attack on their culture and the way they pass down information as well too. Sorry.
Hello. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. So I just want to go ahead and ask everyone what advocacy means to them. I know at the beginning we talked about the fact that you all know what the term is, but I just want to go around and see what it means to everyone. So I'll start here, and then I guess we can go around. If you don't want to participate, you don't have to either.
Use a microphone just so that people who are watching virtually can.
Okay, well, speaking up for what you believe is right in a way that you think can affect change.
I would agree. Advocacy is spreading information about something or just communicating your thoughts on an issue with another person. I think about it as like sometimes stepping back and letting like other people talk, or doing the like passing the mic. So if it's passed to me, passing it to someone else.
So we are thinking of giving someone who hasn't had a platform or doesn't have that access a platform and a voice.
For sure. I think all of your responses kind of encompasses the definition of peer, which is to act in a way to want to support someone, to negotiate on behalf of someone, to negotiate on behalf of yourself, and on behalf of others. So those are great definitions. Thank you. Okay, so we have a few different types of advocacy, which were shown in all of your own definitions of what it means. So, for example, over here, we talked about letting the mic be something that's provided to somebody else. That is something that can be distributed and shown within individual advocacy. And then we have self-advocacy. That's essentially your ability to defend yourself, to negotiate on behalf of yourself. You need to recognize your strengths. You need to recognize your weaknesses, and really just be able to communicate your interests and your desires. This can be shown within your families, right? Like, how do I set boundaries within my family, your friendships, relationships, and then also at the Capitol, right? Like, if let's say that there's a bill being passed that really affects your identity as a person, you will be advocating on behalf of yourself. So now we have individual advocacy. That's essentially one person or a few people advocating on behalf of one or two people and vulnerable demographics. You have informal. Informal is going to be families advocating on behalf, or friends advocating on behalf of a vulnerable population. So like in the school campus, right? Let's say that someone is being oppressed for wearing a pendulum that is associated with their religion, and a teacher or a administrative staff member said that they can't wear that, then possibly a family or a friend will stand up for that person if they're not able to defend themselves. So that's informal. Then we have formal, and that's essentially groups or so organizations that pay their staff to advocate on behalf of groups of people or a person. So for example, like Sisterlove, we are paid to advocate for other people as well. And then we have systems advocacy. So that's also something we do, and that's essentially advocating to change laws and policies, like just strictly laws, rules, policies that essentially trickle down. So it takes on like a top to bottom effect, essentially. So we have some common misconceptions. I can't read them from the top of, like over here, but I know that one of them is I'm too busy, or I'm not political, and I don't have the personality. So really these are just common misconceptions relating to advocacy. A lot of folks, especially nowadays, tensions are high. A lot of people don't want to deal with it, want to kind of take a look away. And in a way, I do understand that. Sometimes mental health days are very necessary. But advocacy, you can provide however much you want. Like, if today you're not feeling it, don't do it. If tomorrow you are, repost that, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be marching or even being at the Capitol. Those are things that you can do that are influential, but you could also, if you don't have the capacity, repost something, talk to your friends, right? Like, I know that I spend a lot of time speaking to my family members because we all have different views, and I'll sit there like at Thanksgiving, right? And being like, listen, that's not okay. Like that Thanksgiving or Christmas kind of thing. And that's a form of advocating, right? And then you can also find your friends and your people within advocacy as well to kind of take that weight off your shoulders. I know sometimes, like, recently we had House Bill 1105 pass, and that is a Hunt for Immigrant bill that just was signed by Governor Kemp, I think today or yesterday. And I called one of my close friends who is an immigrant, and we like talked about it on the phone. And I told her I can't deal with this, and this is insane. And I wish that there was other alternatives to be able to prevent criminalization outside of hunting for immigrants and that type of legislation. But essentially, right, like these are misconceptions, but there are a way around them, and you don't necessarily have to shun away from advocacy entirely simply because of one thing or the other. So government basics, I think I'm just gonna move on from this. So this is the process of how to make a bill of law, right? So a bill is essentially a proposed law. It'll get introduced in one chamber, so either the House or in the Senate into the hopper. From there, it'll get assigned to a committee. If the committee votes on it, and they vote to pass it, right? Then it'll go to the floor for a full vote in the House or in the Senate. And then once it receives that full vote, and they support it, it'll transfer over to the other chamber and they'll go through that same process. So important dates, or not dates, but days to look out for is like crossover day, for example. That is when one bill needs to cross over into, for example, let's say it started in the House, and it is getting voted on by the full House, already was supported in the committee. Then by this certain day, it needs to get a full vote in the full House and cross over into the Senate. If it doesn't, then it dies. And then signing day, which is the last day of our legislative session. So these are a few bills that we were looking at during this session. We've been really taking a look at and advocating for Black maternal health in Georgia, simply because of the high elevated rates of Black women dying due to poor maternal health outcomes, due to a lack of services, lack of quality insurance, as well as chronic health conditions, reproductive cancers. And so one thing that part of our coalitions that we've been discussing is the support for the Georgia Community Midwife Act. That's SB 81 and I believe House Bill 684. But essentially what it does is increase involvement, not only diversity involvement, but also licenses community midwives who have been also doing this work for about 10 years and who have about 50 births on their record. And so what this does is diversify the perinatal workforce and increase Black midwives and people of color who also participate in these sort of perinatal services. And then we have the Georgia Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act. And so this bill, House Bill 1215, was introduced by Representative Park Cannon. And what it does is introduce implicit bias programs and trainings in maternity care settings and in hospitals, so that folks are being, and folks that are doing, folks that are providing these services have this sort of training, so that we can kind of take away the factor that racism and bias plays in maternity care settings, and also hope to decrease those maternal mortality rates here in Georgia. I think a study done in 2022, it was from 2012 to 2018, but I believe it was published in 2021 or 2022. And it said that about 12% of the Black maternal health deaths here in Georgia were related to racism and bias. And we say bias because that's a pretty term that legislators can stomach, but really what it is racism. Go ahead. And so then moving outside of that, we have the Quality Basic Education Act. That was House Bill 822. And the reason why we were behind that one is because it's a step in the right direction to work towards comprehensive sex education here in Georgia. So in Georgia, we operate on an abstinence-based law. And so what that means is that HIV is taught like, okay, preventative care, right? Like PrEP and PEP and just diseases, for example. You can, if you don't want to contract these STIs or HIV, for example, just don't have sex. And that's the abstinence base of it. However, what this would do is really talk about preventative services and preventative care, such as PrEP and PEP, increase medically accurate teaching, and also teach about consent. Healthy relationships is that aspect of consent. And so unfortunately, it still has that like parameter of abstinence being like the general thing that needs to be taught. However, it is a step in the right direction by including HIV and AIDS, and then also that preventative care and the consent. And then we have anti-LGBTQ liberation legislation. So that was House Bill 1104, I think 1170 or 1107, and then SB 88. So it was about 20 bills that were attacks on trans students. They were attacks on gay, lesbian, LGBTQ in general. And what they associated with were don't say gay, right, in schools. That was a major one. I believe that was SB 88. And then there were gender bathroom restrictions. So if you are a female designated and assigned your sex as a female, the gender associated with your sex is at birth is female, then you're forced to go into those bathrooms rather than the ones that you are comfortable with as a trans woman or as a trans man, for example. And then to me, like the worst one, being that I was in school and I played soccer from like the age 4 to about, I don't know, like 17, 18, senior year in high school, was the bans on sports. So essentially, a trans woman could not compete in a female designated sport against that's the gender associated with the sex at birth. And then also the Don't Say Gay bill, it really puts restrictions on teachers too. So like if there's a student that doesn't really know about their gender, they're experiencing gender dysphoria or just want to have these conversations that are really relevant in our modern day society, teachers can't talk about that. If a student tells the teacher, for example, they're forced to report that to the parent, which also ties into like privacy as well, and privacy of the student who is experiencing these changes. So fortunately, Sisterlove and various coalitions in Georgia were able to prevent and block all of these bills. So not one passed. So that's pretty good. It was about 20 of them and none of them passed. That's awesome. And then the last thing is the reproductive freedom. So there's essentially three, but two bills that seek to enshrine reproductive freedom. So protect your rights to abortion, protect your rights to make decisions, like to seek contraception, for example, fertility care as well. So the Reproductive Freedom Act is that House Bill 75, and the SB 15 is the same bill, just one is introduced in the Senate, the other one in the House. But what it would do is enshrine protections on abortion, and it would prevent doctors and also women and gender expensive people from being criminalized for seeking an abortion. But the difference is that these two, right, would amend the statutory law, right? So it would become part of our OCGA, which is our Georgia code, as opposed to a HR 836, which is a constitutional amendment that we introduced, or Representative Schofield introduced. Okay. Representative Schofield introduced that, and what that is an amendment to the Georgia Constitution. It would put abortion on the ballot for people to be able to vote on it in the coming general election. Unfortunately, it did not pass. So you won't see abortion on your ballot, but those are just different ways that we're trying to protect abortion and trying to protect reproductive freedom. And also the cool thing about the constitutional amendment is that it provides authority entirely to the birther to do and make decisions relating to all periods of pregnancy. So it expands it on not just abortion, not just the criminalization of abortion, but also to seek a midwife, right? To access a doula for your abortion care. I know somebody that used to work at Sisterlove. When she went to have her baby boy, she had contracted the services of a doula, and she goes into the hospital and they kick her doula out. Right. And so this would authorize the birther to be able to make those decisions and not have the government intrude on those decisions. But there is two. So there's the Reproductive Freedom Act, and then there's the constitutional amendment. Again, both did not pass, but we are working very diligently with other organizations to be able to support those efforts. So a lot of folks feel sometimes just a little off about how to speak to your legislator. So this is just like a script. If you would all like the slides, we can definitely share those with you if you want to take a moment to read it. I guess I'll give you maybe like 30 seconds to read that. But it's really just a script to be able to speak to your legislator, to email your legislator, to write a letter to your legislator. And these are really easy to find online. A lot of these scripts are available at your community-based organizations' websites. Continue. So how can I be an advocate? That's essentially all the ways we just discussed during my portion of the presentation, but advocate for yourself, advocate for your friends. You can show up on Instagram, right? You can show up on TikTok. You can make a TikTok, I don't know the term. My millennial is showing. Sorry, the TikTok reel or an Instagram reel. I don't know. And then you thank you. And then you can also speak to your legislators. I know a lot of times you're going to be met with just some sort of opposition, but a lot of times you won't be. Like when I first started with Sisterlove, I was at the Capitol quite a bit during this legislative session, and I was shocked to see how quickly I was able to build connections with legislators, and how they really did want to learn from me and hear from us. We did a legislative luncheon to the Georgia Women's Legislative Caucus. It's a bipartisan caucus with representatives and also senators. And we were able to speak to about, I want to say 20 to 25 in the room, right? And some of them would grab lunch and then go eat in their offices, and they signed it over Zoom. And they were very much listening, asking questions. We talked about Black maternal health, HIV, the HIV epidemic here in Georgia, and then mental health as well, and the need to provide better services for folks that are dealing with mental health related issues. So sometimes they're really willing to listen to you, and even if you do have that bad experience, that shouldn't culminate your entire reason for not reaching out to your legislators, especially if you have just a personal experience or a personal story. They want to hear that. And if you're one of their constituents who acted to elect them, they care about your stories as well. And then you can also sign up to your community-based organizations and their events, right? We held an advocacy day as well, where we taught folks we provided this training, and then we curated the bills for what was happening then. But we talked to folks, and we brought them to the Capitol. We paired them up with other community-based organizations that are experts in speaking to legislators, who were able to help them talk to their legislator, feel comfortable as well. And so, we're not the only organization that does advocacy days, right? Spark does them, Faith in Public Life does them, a bunch of other community-based organizations do them. So I would say connect with them. And then also, it's not just about being at the Capitol either. We have, for example, a Healthy Love Youth Advocate Summit coming up. And so that's demographics 16 to 25. We're going to be empowering the youth here in Georgia. We're going to be teaching them about voting. We're also going to be teaching them about healthy love, so healthy relationships, consent, providing HIV and STI testing as well. So we do a lot of community-based organizations that aren't, community-based organizations, community-based work that isn't directly speaking to a legislator or writing a letter or calling your legislator either. Yeah, okay, so that kind of set me up. Take action. Take action. Okay, so we have e-advocate palm cards that directly link you to our e-advocates, essentially kind of like a newsletter. We will be sending out, if we have any sort of event coming up, we'll be sending out information on how to sign up. You can stay in contact with the policy team this way. You can also sign up for Sisterlove's newsletter if you just go on like sisterlove.org. But if you do want to stay connected directly with the policy and advocacy team, I would sign up through here. And then we have pamphlets somewhere here as well. So I think that is it for us. I guess we can open up the floor for questions.
Yeah, also with the also with the e-advocate, that's how we send our call to action. So when we want to mobilize people, if we want to do a protest, if we want to go to the Capitol, that's how you really find out. But we'd like to open the floor to any questions or any ideas if there are any.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to this issue. A question that I do have, because Georgia can be, state politics is so gridlocked, I was wondering, how do we get out of the cycle of so many resolutions and research committees on, you know, maternal health and even reproductive care, and getting them out, actual bills to the floor and really into the right committee? Because I mean, sometimes it doesn't even get to the right committee to get out to the floor. So I was wondering your experience with that recently.
Gabby probably can speak to the bills, but even if you want to take action on issues like that, easy way is one, you can learn to become abortion doula, midwives. When we look at the research of what Black women have said relating to that issue, almost all the leading Black maternal health researchers, experts, or community organizations have said that Black women have told them that the solution to the maternal health crisis is using midwives, returning back to our practices like grandmothering, which is like abortion doulas, midwives. So is to put into practice the work that Black women have said. They said that that's the solution. So either one, becoming one of those people, learning about those people or that profession, supporting organizations that do. If we're talking legislative action, supporting midwives, funding midwives. But we have a bill, I think Gabby can speak to it, about the doula reimbursement. So where if you do choose to use a doula or a midwife, it can be covered by your insurance. So there's ways to talk it legislatively, but also using your body, your energy.
I would say also you have support in numbers for sure. And I'm speaking to what you said about gridlocked, right? We have a divided trifecta is what it's called in Georgia, which means that we have liberals representing us in Congress, but we have conservatives representing us here in Georgia. So the House of Representatives is conservative, our governor is conservative, and our senators are conservative predominantly, and that's the majority of them. However, we do have various legislators that are more so liberal, who are fighting for the things that matter to us, such as Black maternal health. I know that one like big milestone that we were able to do is work with Representative Port Cannon, Senator Kim Jackson, and also Representative Schofield to pass a Black maternal health resolution. And that was passed in the House. Unfortunately, it did not transfer over into the Senate, but even just the what it was, we speak on what it was. So essentially what it did was provide the statistics on what's happening and essentially the plight of a Black woman and a Black woman who's a birther and a birthing person. Here in Georgia, it talked about the death rates, the national death rates, as well as maternal mortality rates, the infant mortality rates for Black babies as well. And the reason why that's so significant in the fact that it passed is because they didn't want to talk about it like a Black issue. They wanted to talk about it as a maternal health issue. And yes, it definitely is a maternal health issue, but we can't shine away from the fact that Black women and birthers are dying at 3 times the rate of any other race or ethnicity, and we need to figure out why. And so what that did was write out these statistics. Everyone who supported that bill and that resolution recognized the state of Black maternal health in Georgia and also signed on to take steps in achieving Black maternal health equity. Outside of that, though, I would say going back to that was a milestone reached, but going back to what you discussed about the gridlock as well, I would say we have strength in numbers, and they listen when there are numbers, especially now that it is an election cycle as well. They really care about their image, and that's unfortunate for me to say, but it is true, right? Legislators also do care about the issues that we care about, right? It's not that they all don't, but it's also an election cycle, and that could be influential. So with that in mind, I would say pair up with your community-based organizations. Like right now, Sisterlove is working on trying to attain grant funding to pass a Black Maternal Health Omnibus Act. And so we've gotten letters of support from Center for Black Women's Wellness, for the National Black Doula Association, for Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, who in 2018, whenever the pilot program that Amanda just discussed for doula reimbursement was passed, because the thing is, the cycle ended, so now they need to pass it again. So we're working on that. But whenever that was passed, I think back in 2018, Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies actually held that program. So we've gotten some letters of support. We have one bill drafted already, and we're working to continue to collaboratively draft the others. And we have some research done in other states. So that's like something that we do as well, is we mirror other states. So for example, right, we have the Black Maternal Health Omnibus Act at the federal level that was passed. That was introduced about twice. And from there, states like Michigan, North Carolina, and various others, Illinois, they're coming to me, but various other states work to pass either a package of bills that resembled that Black Maternal Health Omnibus Act, or a Black Maternal Health Omnibus Act, which is what North Carolina did. In North Carolina, their legislature is similar to ours, so it did not pass, but in Michigan, they passed the 3 package bills. California was the one I was thinking about that passed theirs too. It's a lot easier to do that there, right? So that is something that we worked together on. So like we're constantly talking about strategies. How do we discuss this so that this could be a nonpartisan issue, right? So we want both sides of conservatives and liberals or Democrats to essentially talk about the importance of passing this legislation, because this is not a partisan issue. This is a nonpartisan issue. And how do we strategically talk about that? So I would say strength in numbers. I would say connect with your community-based organizations that are doing this work, right? So you can be part of that process. And in terms of what do you do, work on strategies, discuss strategies on how to pass this sort of legislation. And sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. You know?
Also, Gabby's kind of just made me think of something. It's important how we frame the issue. Maternal health is a really easy way to, when we're talking about gridlock or partisan issues, maternal health is a unifying issue, especially because some more conservative people who are pro-life, they may be more open to things that protect the life of the mother because they care about the life of the baby. Maternal health also really impacts those in rural areas, so conservatives care about those issues too. So it's how you frame it, so you can kind of frame that issue as something that affects their constituents as well too.
Thank you all so much for being here. I was curious if you all could speak to the sort of contradiction that comes when someone understands the importance of advocacy, but also is growing disillusioned with like using state apparatuses and relying on the government to make these changes. Like in your work, how do you deal with that maybe sort of like ideological tension and still move through that? Or like, how do you encourage people who have experienced that already and who are still trying to like not shy away from advocacy work?
I can definitely speak to that because that's something that I struggle with. I guess just personally, from my own personal experience, the more, what's the term? I'll say the more I learned, the more disillusioned I became, or you don't want to use the systems that's in power. But honestly, I feel like that shows you that, one, we'll talk about voting just because a lot of people have voter apathy. Why should we still vote? Because we don't really have a choice. There's only 2 people. One, that's absolutely true. But we still have to vote, because if we don't use these systems, they'll erode. Same thing like with your body. If you don't use your muscles as you age, your muscles will not work. Same thing with our electoral system. Yes, at its core, the electoral system is a good idea. Democracy is a good idea. Is it working properly? No. But we still need to participate in these systems so that they don't just completely go away. But we have to understand that that's not the only way to change. Voting is not going to save us on itself. You need to vote and do other things as well. So that's kind of how I reconcile with it. You also don't have to vote for a Democrat or Republican. You can vote for an independent. Maybe the more people who do that, other people fall out of those the two-party system. But if you struggle with that, you can still participate in the systems, because we live here, and as a person in society, whether we vote or not, it's still going to affect us. But you can just have that understanding that that's not the only way that will get us liberated.
I can speak a little bit. It's not necessarily to government, but you can apply the same like logic to the question you just framed. But I dealt with that a lot, like in law school, dealing with these systems, like just higher education, right? Especially as someone who comes from a more impoverished family and household where they can't help, working full time while also trying to go to school. And then I'm dealing with, okay, now these teachers aren't, any sort of flexible with me. Now I'm required to also not only, at least when I went into law school, not only go to law school, but attend these classes, work a full-time job, and also work for free, right? And so my mental health is deteriorating, and then even the system of law school. Like I'm currently applying for my bar exam with about $2,000 just to be able to put in an application for the Georgia bar to determine whether I'm fit to sit for the bar. And then from there, it's like another $600 for me to apply for the bar. And then it's another $1,000 to $2,000 for me to get the materials that I need in order to pass the bar, because law school does not prepare you for the bar. So it's like, why, so I dealt with that a lot, where it's like the systems, it's like they're just on your back constantly, like just like a heavy books on your heart, right? And I talked about this a lot with my dad, and what he would always tell me is you have to play the system. Play the system. That's how you win. Play the game. That's all the game. And once you get into these certain positions, you don't, not only do you need to be in these positions, right, but you need to be conscientious as well, but in a good person as well, but also get into these positions. It's like Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, and I know Rachel over here is going to talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but it's like Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, you have to be in the position with the folks who hold the levers in order to actually affect change. And I live by that. Play system.
Also, honestly, while we're playing the game, we should also be taking steps to building the world that we want to see. So say I really care about homelessness, my legislators aren't doing anything, something small that I do. I literally just get those big bags of cuties, I just keep it in my car. If I see someone, you give it to them. That's something super small, like small acts that might make you feel better with that conscious reconciliation that you struggle with. If you care about lack of childcare, maybe you on Saturdays take your friends' kids and you watch them. So if you care about lack of childcare, if you care about we don't have any access to healthy foods, you might start a community garden. But we need to be daily practicing the things that we want to see in a better world and making steps to that, especially while we're participating in the systems that cause that violence too.
Yeah, you made a perfect point that really brings me to the fact that, like, okay, Amanda is about to graduate with her master's degree, right? I just graduated with my law degree, and what are we doing with our careers, right? Like, our passion, what we love to do, like our advocacy, for example, is all systems of advocacy. Not only are we participating in systems advocacy, which is changing laws and regulations, but we're also advocating on behalf of ourselves and on behalf of people that we care about as well. So that's also important. And for example, Representative Park Cannon, she was a doula before she became a representative, and now she's working to pass legislation that helps doulas and midwives and Black birthers, right? So, yeah, I think what you said is like key. It's not only about continuing to play the system, but it's also about creating a world that you want to be in while you're in that system as well.
Thank you.
So about a little bit touching back to your point about policy and like looking at other states, and I know through data, southern states, well, states with restrictive abortion laws, maternal mortality is actually increased through that. So I was thinking, since you're working at the Capitol and you're seeing this legislation, is there a possibility to tie abortion access into maternal health policy, framing it that way, if that's something that can be done?
Yes, I don't know if that's been done in Georgia, but I know in Idaho and some other states where they passed those those restrictive abortion policies, they were able to tie the fact that most OBGYNs were leaving the state because of those policies, so it made them have lack of access to care. So they were directly able to make that link. I don't know if that's been done in Georgia, but I know for sure that it happened in Idaho.
I have a question. We were all relieved when all those trans bills didn't pass. What happened? As an insider, I don't know if you can explain, how that, they died.
So essentially, they weren't picked up. So it's like Russian roulette at the end of the day, getting closer to sanidad. And the House Speaker can decide to either put it on the agenda for the floor to vote on or not, and they weren't picked up.
What was there just lack of? Were they thinking about? Were Republicans thinking about blowback, or were they just not that motivated, or?
I'm really thinking it's the organizations that were really fighting against these bills. I wasn't there as much as I wanted to be because we had other initiatives, but man, they were there like every day for, I don't even know, a week and a half to 2 weeks. We were receiving messages, right, because we're connected, receiving messages like, we're going to be here from 9 a.m. to this amount of time, and we're talking to our legislators. We're bringing folks with personal experience to speak on this, right? Like I know for the gender bathroom bill, I believe it was SB 88, Representative Park Cannon has an assistant, and her name is not Michelle Bennett. She's a Latinx trans woman. Aubrey Escalera. Yeah. Okay. So she spoke on her personal experiences having a difficult time even using the bathroom at the Capitol. And she works there, right? So I really think that these personal experiences, also advocating, really work to influence legislators. And I think that it's important to note that an election cycle was coming up, and there's a lot of eyes on them. So that's kind of like the back end of what we noticed.
I'll also say I went to a lot of those committee hearings. Those hearings were the ones that were always packed every single time. They always had people telling personal stories. At the beginning of those hearings, some of the legislators weren't really talking about the actual bodies of the bills. Towards the later hearings, they started working through the body of the bill, asking questions, and realized a lot of stuff didn't even make sense. So I think that presence also forced people to actually have to look at the bill, read it, what does it say, realize a lot of things literally didn't make any sense. But one thing I can say, all of those hearings were always had people in there, where the room was overflowing every single time. And constituents were directly asking legislators questions that they couldn't answer. So it was like a direct confrontation with the people who were being affected. So I think that also contributed to it as well.
One thing we do a lot of kind of education at Charis around these issues, and so one thing that we had done a lot during off season was really educate parents to be legislators, to be legislative advocates in some of the ways that y'all are talking about, specifically around trans stuff. And one of the things that we heard from Republicans behind closed doors last session was, we don't actually care that much about this, This is a small minority of people who really care about this on the fringe right, but like y'all are not, the left is not putting forward education bills, for example. And so this is what's on the pipeline. And if y'all are not putting up enough stuff, we don't have anything like to discuss. So a failure of the left is, one of the things that I'm excited to see is these proactive bills around maternal health, right? We have to be proactive around trans safety, and that's not happening because the Democrats, we had to do a lot of backdoor education with the Democrats because they would get out there and say ignorant stuff about trans people thinking they were helping. They would say really dumb stuff because they didn't know any better. And so the Democrats had to be brought up to speed. And I think next legislative session, there's going to be a need to then encourage them to take the proactive stance of here are some positive bills to protect trans children and adults in Georgia that you could be putting forward. They're not going to pass, but you can gum up the works in the same way that, there's this whole pipeline of right-wing bills that are not being written in Georgia. They're just, they're right-wing think tanks that are writing this. We can hand them left-wing think tank bills and they can come up the works, but we didn't have the groundwork. It's taken 2 years to build those relationships with some of those folks in the House and in the Senate to even get them to consider.
Thank you so much. I do want to put in just a quick plug. I know I see a question over here, but just a quick plug. Sisterlove is currently working with Spark Reproductive Justice now to host some town halls. And so the idea is to be able to talk to candidates, right, who are competing in these elections coming up and to figure out, okay, what issues are they going to vote on this way as opposed to this way? What issues matter to me that I want them to know, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to talk to your potential future legislator, definitely sign up for this eradicate program because we'll have more information on that. It's going to be a total of 3. One of them is on solely reproductive justice issues focused. But I have a question over here, or did
I was just scratching my
And folks who are watching on the online had asked, we will email these slides out because they're a little hard to see, but I'll give you all everybody's email. Make sure they get to them because I know they're excited.
Another policy about the right wing think tanks, I mean, they're busy and you can see they're basically identical by state being presented. So in your experience, are you seeing that, more left think tanks for instance, African American Policy Forum, are they not proliferating as much as those right wing think tanks then?
In my opinion, no.
When you say think tanks, do you mean research, clinical trials? What do you recommendations?
Yes, those organizations that are kind of have the model of what the policy is going to say, what it's going to look like, and handing it, to, right wing, legislators. Here's what you can present here in Georgia. Is the left kind of doing that, or are they just not keeping up with that?
I don't know if the left is doing that, but if we don't see it, I should tell someone.
Yeah, right. Do you know who mainly writes the majority of these bills that are presented by, let's say, Part Shannon, Elena Aaron, things like that?
So that is, I think it's an unrecognized rule of law where the person that writes it isn't necessarily they're not going to receive any sort of credit at all, and the representative that proposes it is therefore the author of it. So that's a little bit difficult to answer. I know that community-based organizations such as Sisterlove do take part in writing a lot of legislation, and then from there we seek sponsorship. So a representative that also cares about the issue or thinks that the issue is important. But that I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly who writes the most legislation now. Thank you.
One thing to note just on the right-wing bill specifically about trans issues is that over 12,000 bills were written by one think tank last year, specifically targeting trans people. So I think, they got time. We need to have time. We need to make that time. And I think, you know, you see that it's modeled off of anti-abortion legislation. The same, you know, and particularly just anything around limiting people's bodily autonomy. Like, it's just all the same bodily autonomy fight. So I really appreciate how Sisterlove is making those things, because it really is the same fight, and the right knows it's the same fight, and they are absolutely using the same playbook. So it's a Heritage Foundation. And
Project 2025.
yeah, Project 2025. And
Get that book memorized.
plays one. You can do some keyword searches to see, like, you know, they mention women and girls hundreds of times. They mention men 12 times, boys 0 times. So you can see where their focus is.
Yeah.
They're not coming for minute.
All right. If there is no other questions, I want to thank you so much for being here, for taking time out of your days just to be here and be in community with us. And please come to our other events. Sign up.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody watching online. We will send the slides out to you if you appreciate